So we're reading a chapter called The World, and to some extent it is about what we can say about the world, what the world consists of, what the world is like. And the world is an expression that philosophers use to really denote everything. Everything that we can imagine is the world, not just the earth, not just the solar system, not perhaps just the physical world, but the everything. What kind of place is it? And what kind of things inhabit this world? What kind of things compose this world? What is the world composed of? Those are the kind of metaphysical questions about reality that we're asking here. But to a large extent, this chapter is not just about the world, but about how we perceive the world, or about our relationship with the world. Because what we find very quickly, if we try to describe what the world is like, that we have to deal with the question of how we know it, and whether we can know it. And if we can know it, whether there is one version of the world, one description of the world that is correct, or whether we have to be content with multiple descriptions of the world. This chapter starts with a distinction between primary and secondary qualities. And then that leads to an argument for relativism. And really, I think the first point that you want to check in your comprehension of this chapter is whether you understand how the one leads to another. That is, how does the distinction between primary and secondary qualities lead to an argument for, and at least a discussion of, or raise the topic of relativism? Well, let's start then with the primary and secondary qualities. The basic idea, and I think that the excerpt from Galileo is very helpful here, is that there are some qualities or features or characteristics of physical things, the physical things that surround us, which are the real qualities of the thing, which are inherent in the thing, which are the objective, you may say, qualities of the thing. And that there are other qualities that we perceive in things which, upon reflection, we realize are not inherent and objective qualities of these physical objects, but rather are rather strange qualities that can either be said to be entirely subjective, that is, exist in us, or to be a result of our interaction with the object. Let's take a simple object like this coffee mug. I guess my idea of its primary qualities are things like its mass, its dimensions, its volume, things that can be described mathematically, and the idea of those being primary qualities is that they are the real qualities of the thing. That is, that they don't vary from one observer to another, for instance, that they are the same if they are correctly discovered, or they are correctly described. They are the qualities that the thing has in itself, and the qualities that the thing would have whether I was around or not. That is, if we say that that mug has a certain mass, we are taking it for granted that that mass is the same whether I'm here or not, or whether I'm perceiving it or not, I should say. Maybe my mass of my body is in some way or another affecting the mass of the cup. I don't know physics that well. Well, let's contrast a quality like extension or mass or volume with a color, with a characteristic like color. What is the color of the cup? Well, first of all, it would seem to me that my answer to that question would depend upon when I saw it. If I saw it in dim light, it would appear to have one color. If I saw it in bright light, it would appear to have another. If I saw it from far away, it would have one color. If I saw it from up close, it would have another. If I saw it at different times, it would appear to have different colors. And moreover, I recognize that between human individuals, that our perception of color seems to be different. That there are some people who are so-called colorblind, and my understanding is that they simply see colors in a kind of non-standard way. That is, they see colors differently than the majority of the population. We are also told that we can sort of guess that other animals see different colors when they look at the same thing we do. This considerably complicates the question of what the color of the thing is, and we could extend it to taste and to smell and to certain tactile sensations that its smoothness, its roughness, things like that. The idea of the secondary quality is that upon reflection I realized that there's no real answer to the question, what is the color of a physical object? Because color is not an inherent quality of the physical object. Color is something that I perceive, and if it exists at all, it exists in my perception of it. And one could say that I think a perfectly okay way of thinking about this distinction between primary and secondary qualities is objective and subjective qualities. When we talk about mass and dimension, volume, we're talking about things that we claim are objective qualities of the thing. When we talk about something's taste or its color or its odor, we're talking about subjective qualities, that qualities, as Galileo says, that exist not in the thing, but rather in our minds. Now that may be a very simplified version of it, but once you take that step with secondary qualities, you can see how it supports, if we focus for the moment exclusively on so-called secondary qualities, you can see how it supports a kind of a relativism. If I realize that these secondary qualities of things, that is the features that really do appear to me to be the qualities of the world, if I realize that they vary from individual to individual, or from species to species, or in my own individual case from time to time, I realize that my view of the world and my perception of the world is utterly dependent upon the way that I am. And I realize that the way that I am is not the way that everyone else is, so that they perceive differently than I do. They perceive what amounts to a different world, the relativist would say, than I do. Now you may wonder, how can we sort of get along in living in different worlds? Well, it may be that practically speaking there's very little difference. That is, if the sort of cues we get from our environment that we need to survive, danger cues or cues for things that satisfy our basic needs like food and drink, if they're practically successful, then it would seem that two people who perceive the world very differently, as long as they were sort of getting along in the world according to the way they perceive the world, that there would be really no reason to try to choose between them, to say which one was a better or worse way of perceiving the world, as long as they both sort of got along practically in that world. But that does sort of ignore the question of truth. If the world is for me the way it is because of the way that I perceive it, and it appears differently to you or to someone else because of the way that you or the other person perceives it, and then the question is, well, is there one true version of the world? Or is one of our versions of the world at least more correct than the other? The full-blown relativist says that's not the right question. You got to sort of get off the idea that there is one world that we simply know. The relativist would say, perhaps, that each of us lives in a different world, in the sense that each of us perceives different things and has different thoughts and sensations, and that is, for all intents and purposes, the world for us. So there is no world in itself. There is only a world relative to a perceiver, which I think is the basic idea of relativism.